Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Amy Chai coming to you live, talking about the first in what I think is going to be probably a series of talks. And what I'm calling these talks is what happened to America and how can we fix it? And I really wanted to come up with something maybe that was a little bit more clickbaity or something, but I'm just going to tell it like it is. Today, I kind of want to go a little bit over what the problem is. And then in some of the next talks, I want to talk about like maybe what we can do about it. And these talks, I want you to kind of share them with everybody. These are not partisan talks. These are not Republican or Democrat talks. These are not libertarian or independent or green talks. These are American talks because people, we need to talk. We need to talk about what we're going to do to solve the problems that we have in our country. And so, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start. So, the first part of what I'm going to be talking about is what happened to America. I think everybody knows that we've had a lot of problems with feeling as though we, the people, are not being represented. We've seen an increasing wealth gap in our nation where the rich are getting richer and the middle class is absolutely hanging on by its fingernails to try to survive. We see protests. We see racial conflicts. We see what I like to call wedge issues. And I'll talk a little bit about wedge issues later. We all think more alike on wedge issues than you may think, but they're useful to the political parties as they do try to divide us. And then when we go to the ballot and we look at the ballot and we're like, we can't believe what we're seeing on the ballot. We're like, is this really the best we can do in America? Is this the best that America has to offer? And of course, you know the answer as well as I do. It isn't the best that America has to offer. So, how did we get here? How did we get into this world of division and vitriol and poverty and homelessness and despair and open borders and conflict? How did we get here? And is there anything that we can do about it? Well, a couple of years ago, I thought the answer was, of course, there's something we can do about it. We can run third parties. We can go in there and represent people over party. And I remember, running with the independent party in 2022, we thought that we had a very good message and we were really supporting the people and the people's needs. And we really were putting people over party and we really wanted to represent the people. We had a lot of very smart people getting together and talking about what needed to happen in our state and across the nation. But it really wasn't that simple. It wasn't that simple. It turns out that the two-party system has hijacked America. And what's happened to us now is that we are not a representative republic anymore. We are living in an oligarchy that is run by primarily big business and the ultra wealthy individuals who donate literally billions of dollars to the political process. It turns out, actually, there was a study done to check um, the correlation between grassroots desires, people's expressed desires, versus the donor class's desires. And what they did was they made those correlations with public policy. And guess what they found? Well, it turns out that the donors were correlated with policy, but people and grassroots organizations were really not correlated at all with policy. So that study basically proved that we are living in an oligarchy right now. And we talk about the whole, and I hate to bring this up again, the whole January 6th issue. The narrative, of course, being that a bunch of people tried to overturn free and fair elections. But the truth is that our elections are neither free nor fair, but yet they're not fraud either, and they're not illegal. Let me explain what I found out when I ran for office about what the two-party system is really doing to us. And it's not really pretty. You're going to be unhappy. Okay, you're going to be unhappy. But the problem that we have, it's, the RNC, it's the DNC, it's the people who fund the RNC and the DNC. And it's how these organizations are not transparent. They're not accountable. They're not democratic, and they're not diverse. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about, what has happened, talking a little bit about the RNC and the DNC. So what do we know about the Democrat and Republican national conventions? Well, we know that they are private corporations, and these private corporations have zero obligation to the voting public, zero obligation to the voting public. They don't even have any obligation to honor their own bylaws. I suppose they can be sued if they don't honor their own bylaws, but realistically, they can do whatever they want, and they can put whoever they want on the ballot, and that's exactly what they do. So if they're private corporations, who elected them? Who elected them? Well, the answer is nobody elected them. So the elected officials of our nation, congressmen and such like, are all members pretty much of either the DNC or the RNC, and they go as delegates. But other than that, really all bets are off. It's not very transparent. So what we have is we have two unelected private corporations that are really not subject to election laws. They're not accountable to anyone. They lack transparency. And whenever voters try to sue them, the cases are dismissed because they have no obligation to the voters or even to their own bylaws. They don't owe us anything. And, I didn't actually realize that this was the case until the 2017 to 2018 Bernie Sanders lawsuit, after WikiLeaks released the information about the Clinton versus Sanders case, where the DNC clearly was favoring Hillary Clinton and treating Bernie Sanders unfairly. Well, the voters who had voted for Bernie Sanders and had voted with their money as well as their votes and their time, they placed a class action lawsuit against Debbie Wasserman, the Deborah Wasserman Schultz, excuse me, as well as the DNC itself. And they litigated this for probably almost a year, and then the court basically threw it out. And what the Democratic lawyer basically said was, look, we're a private corporation. We can do whatever we want. If we wanted to go and smoke cigars in a back room somewhere and choose whoever we wanted to be on the ballot, we could actually literally do that because that's within our rights. So where this lawsuit was covered, that really struck a nerve with a lot of people when they found out the reality of what goes on in the RNC and the DNC. It was proof that the DNC, at least, we didn't have proof from the RNC, but I'm sure that goes on there as well. But we had proof that they really did not respect the will of the voters. So the DNC reportedly argued that the organization's neutrality among Democratic campaigns during the primary votes was nothing more than a quote unquote political promise. And therefore, there was no legal obligation to remain impartial in the primary process. And apparently, the Supreme Court agreed with that. So the first thing to know about the RNC and the DNC is that they're private and they don't have to do anything that they don't want to do. So they put people on the ballot that they want on the ballot. But what's the next step? Okay. What happens when you elect someone, either Republican or Democrat? At that point, right, they're supposed to actually represent the people, right? Right? Well, unfortunately, no. It turns out that the candidates really don't represent the people at all. Or if they do, it's just like a random coincidence. It's like, oh, I represented the people today. Whoops, I didn't mean to. So the candidates represent the party. They represent what the party wants. And they're very strongly discouraged from thinking for themselves or setting out on their own course. And if they do think for themselves or they try to represent the people, they're going to be smeared. They're going to be raked over the coal. Okay. Like, look what happened to Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, when he sort of went against the narrative and he said, we're having trouble with all of these migrants. We're going to have a lot more money. We don't have room for all these migrants. It's causing problems with social services. This isn't good for New York City. Well, boom, all of a sudden what happens? The Democrats come out with some dirt on Eric Adams. And they smeared him with discrediting him with taking money from some Turkish interests. So they'll use smear tactics, or they'll force people out of office, or they'll make sure they're not elected again. And that helps keep people on narrative. So Open Secrets, and I don't know if you've ever looked at Open Secrets, but it's a great website. It's called opensecrets.org. And, a lot of the information that I got from this did come from opensecrets.org. So I'm not making it up. Open Secrets has something that's called a party unity score. And what's that? Well, that party unity score is the score about how often the candidates vote party line, okay? And there is some data that came out that I saw, and Open Secrets had said that in the 1970s, the percentage of party line voting was about 60%. So people did vote with the party more than average, but about 40% of the time they voted representing their constituents. And that was the 1970s. But what happened in 2020? Well, the party unity scores for Democrats in the House was 95.5%. And for Democrats in the Senate, it was 98.5%. And this is frighteningly close to 100% party line voting. And also in 2020, the party unity scores for Republicans in the House was 87%, and in the Senate was 93.4%. So this probably actually represents the fact that the RNC is a little bit less in control of who gets on the ballot. So accidentally, some people got on the ballot that probably actually wanted to represent their constituents, but that happens. It's just because the RNC is a little bit less organized and a little bit less well able to control who gets on their ballots. So if all of these candidates are voting the party line, right? And all the candidates are chosen by the DNC or the RNC, and the platform, of course, is created by the DNC and the RNC. And the RNC and the DNC are both unelected corporations with no obligation to the voter. What does that mean? It means that, number one, we don't have control over who gets on even the primary ballot. But after they get on the primary ballot, we don't have control over who is the candidate. And once a candidate is elected, we don't necessarily have control over how they're going to vote or what policy that they're going to implement. And what that means is our country is basically being run by the RNC and DNC people, which is a very small fraction of people in our country. And it doesn't represent the will of the voters at all. So these organizations, the RNC and DNC, they're not transparent. They're not transparent with their funds, okay? And this is a huge problem. There's an organization called the FEC, which is the Federal Election Commission, okay? And they're supposed to enforce transparency on these groups. Well, there's something called special purpose accounts. And these special purpose accounts can be for anything that the party needs, like maybe it's for lawyers' fees, or maybe it's for office buildings or something. They're special purpose accounts. Now, an individual can contribute over a 2-year period up to $1.7 million to each of these special accounts. Well, these accounts aren't really transparent. I mean, we don't really know what they do with that money. And there's been a lawsuit filed against the FEC to try to make sure that those expenditures are transparent, but right now they're not. So a lot of money is flowing into the parties and into these special accounts with absolutely no accountability and absolutely no transparency. I think that's a problem. The RNC and DNC, they're not democratic either, and they're not diverse. They don't represent the makeup of the people of America. For example, delegates that go to the DNC, minimum 10% and probably more of that come directly from the teachers' unions. Well, that's a huge overrepresentation of teachers' unions creating our policy, in our federal policy, because they're the delegates and they make sure who gets in on the ballots and who gets elected. And it's not just the teachers union, it's also, all of the public employees have a great deal of influence, particularly in the Democrat Party. But it's not just the public sector, the bureaucracy that has control. It's also the ultra rich. There are 12 donors, 12 donors, okay, who make up a major portion of the $45 billion that was donated federally in the 10 years between like 2010 to 2020. Um, that's not a lot of donors. That's 12 people who have really undue influence over the policy that gets created by our RNC and by our DNC that gets voted on in Washington. The donors get accountability. The people do not get accountability. And that's what we call an oligarchy, not a representative republic. So the problems that we have are great. The influence of money, and I know you guys all know the problem that we've had with Citizens United. And over the past 10 or 15 years since Citizen United was actually ruled on by the Supreme Court, we have had a great deal of money flooding, just flooding into our political system. In fact, the 2020 election at a federal level cost $14.4 billion. That's outrageous. And, we're having more and more people who are actually donating to political parties, but your average donor doesn't even donate $200. A lot of them will donate $50, $25, $100. So we have this clustering of small donations from ordinary people, and then we have huge donations from obscenely wealthy individuals. And this is skewing the influence of policy in our country. And of course, where would we be without talking about things like the businesses that are big tech, big pharma, the military industrial complex, and all these other companies that continually donate money and basically create a situation where we are not being represented, but rather the donor class is being represented. So why is this important? Why is this important? I'll tell you why it's important. And that is, out of all the people in America, there was a poll in 2020, and it asked about how people identify themselves, Republican, Democrat, or other. And among registered voters who were likely to vote, about 25% had identified as Republican, about 25% had identified as Democrat, and 50% had identified as other. So what we have here is 50% of the population that is completely underrepresented in our elections. And these are people whose parties are legally kept off the ballot. Now, what do I mean by that? I don't probably have time to go into that quite as much as I would like to, but there are ways, there are legal ways to keep third parties off of the ballot. And if there's one thing that is bipartisan in this country, it's keeping third parties off the ballot. And so what they do is they make rules that are sometimes different for third parties when compared to Republican or Democrat, that makes it almost unimaginably difficult to even get on the ballot. And we've also seen cases in which the parties, either Republican or Democrat, will bring frivolous lawsuits against the third party. And then the attorney general, which is a politically appointed office, doesn't actually try the case until after the election. Or they try it and they kick it up to a higher court, and then the person who brought the lawsuit just doesn't have the money or the resources to continue on with that lawsuit. So, and then it drains the smaller, much smaller amounts of money that the third party candidates actually have. So they run out of money. They can't get on the ballot. And then if it's a federal election, like right now, we have the No Labels Party, and we also have the Libertarian Party, and we also have the Forward Party. Well, getting on these ballots is very difficult. To get your candidate on 50 ballots for 50 states is an almost insurmountable goal, because all of the states have different laws, and it can be very time consuming, very expensive, and very difficult to actually get on those ballots. So having a third party candidate run for, say, for president, like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is doing, for him to get on all 50 ballots would be pretty miraculous. We did have a libertarian candidate in 2020, Jo Jorgensen, and the struggle to get her on the ballot and to get her heard in the debates was, well, it was basically a failure. Nobody listened to her. Nobody was willing to hear what she had to say, because it's not controlled by the people, it's controlled by the money. So if you've ever wondered why you have these two clowns on the ballot that you're not happy about, that you don't want to vote for, that you don't think perhaps are even competent, that's why. Because it's not about you. It's not about me. It's about money. Okay. And if you don't have that money, well, sorry, you're not going to be heard. So they use these little social issues, these wedge issues, these race, gender, abortion, all these other issues. They use them against us to try to divide us. It's like, look, a squirrel, you look the other way, and, maybe you'll forget that you have no power in this country while you're arguing with your neighbor over something that's pretty ridiculous and really doesn't matter as much as the fact that we're trillions and trillions of dollars in debt right now, and that the dollar is no longer going to be the global currency. And they don't care. They don't care. They care about themselves. They don't care about you. So that's what happened to America. In a nutshell, that is what happened to America. So I have an idea of what we can do about it that is going to bring people together from every party. And you don't think that's possible, but it is. Even the extremists deserve to be heard, okay? We're going to have Greens, Libertarians, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Forwardists, and Independents all together. There's going to be something in this party that is going to welcome everyone of every race and every ideology, because we need to listen to each other. We need to work together. I'm going to discuss a little bit more about how we can do that coming up on my next issue of What Happened to America and What Can We Do About It. So I hope you'll DM me, or you'll listen and tune in next time. Tell a friend. tell an enemy, because we're all in this together. We're all in this together. So great talking to you. And we will see you again next time.